When the old house on Ocean Boulevard finally sold after sitting empty for 3 decades, the real estate agent called to say there was something in the basement I needed to see before the new owners took possession. A safe, a heavy iron safe built into the concrete wall that nobody had known existed, hidden behind shelving units that had been there since before I was born. My father's safe. And when the locksmith finally got it open, when I saw what was inside, I realized that everything I thought I knew about my father, about my childhood, about my entire family history, had been a carefully constructed lie. Good morning, my beautiful souls. My name is Dorothy Ann Morrison, but everyone has always called me Dot. I'm 81 years old, and I've lived right here in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina for my entire life. Well, technically Conway, but close enough that I've always just said Myrtle Beach, because more people know where that is. Today I'm going to share with you the most shocking discovery of my life, a story about secrets and lies, and a father I thought I knew but didn't know at all. But before I begin, if you're watching this, please don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to Grandma's Touching Stories so you never miss one of our real-life stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Are you in South Carolina like me? Maybe you're in New York or California, or even watching from another country. I love knowing where my stories are reaching. Now settle in with your coffee or sweet tea, get comfortable, because what I'm about to tell you is going to take a while, and I promise you, every word of it is absolutely true. It was March of 2024 when I got that call from the real estate agent. The house had been on the market for almost 2 years, ever since my brother Howard finally convinced me it was time to let it go. Neither of us had lived there since the 80s. Howard moved to Charlotte in 1987, and I'd been in my own place in Conway since I got married in 1962. We'd kept the house after Daddy died in 1994, partly out of sentiment and partly because we just couldn't face dealing with all his things. We'd locked it up, paid the property taxes every year, and let it sit there on Ocean Boulevard like a time capsule from another era. But property values in Myrtle Beach had gone through the roof in recent years, and Howard, who's always been more practical than me, finally said we were being foolish hanging on to it. So we listed it. The first year we didn't get a single serious offer because the place needed so much work. The roof leaked, the plumbing was shot, and the whole interior needed to be gutted and renovated. But finally, a developer made an offer. Not a great offer, but enough that Howard and I agreed to take it. They were going to tear it down and build condos, which broke my heart a little. But that's progress, I suppose. The real estate agent, a young woman named Melissa, who couldn't have been more than 30, called me on a Tuesday morning. I was out in my garden, trying to get my tomatoes planted early, when my phone rang. "Mrs. Morrison," she said, and I could hear excitement in her voice. "The contractors were doing their final walkthrough of your father's house, and they found something in the basement. A safe. It was hidden behind some old shelving units. Did you know it was there?" I stood there in my garden with dirt on my hands, completely confused. A safe? Daddy had never mentioned a safe. After he died, Howard and I had gone through the whole house, looking for important documents, bank statements, insurance policies, that sort of thing. We'd never found anything about a safe. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Maybe it's from before my father owned the house?" "I don't think so," Melissa said. "The contractor says it looks like it was installed in the 1940s or 50s based on the model, and there's a piece of paper taped to it with your name on it. Just your name, Dorothy." When old handwriting. My heart started beating faster. Daddy's handwriting. It had to be. "Don't let them open it," I said quickly. "I'm coming over there right now." I dropped everything, washed my hands as quick as I could, grabbed my purse and keys, and drove to Ocean Boulevard. It only took 20 minutes. But it felt like hours. My mind was racing the whole way. What could be in that safe? Why would Daddy hide it and never tell me about it? And why was there a note with my name on it? The house looked sad and neglected when I pulled up, the paint peeling, the yard overgrown with weeds. I'd grown up in that house. It had been beautiful once, a 2-story craftsman-style home built in 1947, one of the nicer houses in the neighborhood back then. Daddy had been so proud of it. He'd bought it in 1943, right before he shipped out to the Pacific during World War II. When he came back in 1946, he married my mother, and they moved in together. I was born in 1943, right there in the upstairs bedroom, before Daddy even went to war. Howard came along in 1948. Melissa met me at the door along with the contractor, a heavy-set man named Bill, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "It's down in the basement," Melissa said, leading the way. I followed them down the narrow stairs, ducking my head because the ceiling was low. I hadn't been down in that basement in decades. It still smelled the same, musty and damp, with that particular smell that old basements have. The safe was right where they said it would be, built into the concrete wall in the back corner. The shelving units that had hidden it were pushed aside now, revealing a heavy iron door about 2 feet square, painted gray, with a combination lock in the center. And taped to it, yellowed with age, was a piece of paper with my name written in faded blue ink. Dorothy. Daddy's handwriting. I'd recognize it anywhere. He always made his D's with that distinctive loop. "Have you tried to open it?" I asked Bill. He shook his head. "Figured I should wait for you, but I called a locksmith. He should be here in about an hour." I nodded, unable to take my eyes off that safe. Why had Daddy never told me about it? We'd been close, or at least I'd thought we were. After Mama died in 1981, I'd taken care of him for those last 13 years of his life. We'd had dinner together every Sunday. He'd told me stories about the war, about his childhood, about how he'd met Mama, but he'd never once mentioned a safe in the basement. The locksmith arrived right on schedule, a young man with a shaved head and a toolbox full of specialized equipment. It took him almost 2 hours to get that safe open. He tried listening to the tumblers, tried some kind of magnetic device, finally had to drill through the lock mechanism. The whole time I sat on the basement stairs, my hands clasped together, my stomach in knots. Part of me wanted to know what was inside. Part of me was terrified. When the safe door finally swung open with a rusty creak, the locksmith stepped back and gestured for me to look. "All yours, ma'am," he said. I stood up on shaky legs and walked over to peer inside. The safe wasn't very deep, maybe 18 inches, but it was packed full. Envelopes, photographs, documents, all stuffed inside like someone had been in a hurry. My hands were shaking as I reached in and pulled out the first handful of items. The photographs were old, the kind with white borders and that particular faded color of pictures from the 40s and 50s. I looked at the first one and my breath caught in my throat. It was my father, much younger, maybe in his early 20s, standing next to a beautiful dark-haired woman I'd never seen before. They were both smiling, his arm around her shoulders, and she was looking up at him with such obvious love that it made my chest hurt. Behind them was what looked like the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. I looked at another photograph. Daddy and the same woman, sitting on a blanket at what looked like a beach picnic. Another one of them standing in front of a small house with a white picket fence. Another of the woman alone, holding a baby. A baby. I turned the photograph over with trembling hands. Written on the back in Daddy's handwriting. Catherine and baby James, September 1942. Catherine. James. I'd never heard those names, not once in my entire life. Who were these people? I grabbed another envelope from the safe and pulled out more photographs. Daddy and Catherine on what looked like their wedding day. Her in a simple white dress, him in his army uniform. Daddy and Catherine with the baby, who looked to be about a year old. The baby had Daddy's eyes. You could see it even in the old faded photograph. "Mrs. Morrison?" Melissa's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you all right? You've gone very pale. Do you need to sit down?" I realized I was swaying on my feet. Bill grabbed my elbow and guided me back to the stairs. I sat down hard, still clutching the photographs. "Who is this?" I asked out loud, even though nobody there could answer me. "Who is Catherine? Who is James?" I spent the next hour going through everything in that safe. There were letters, dozens of them, exchanged between my father and Catherine from 1940 to 1943. Love letters, talking about their future together, about the house they were going to buy, about the baby. There was a marriage certificate from Sacramento, California, dated June 15, 1941. William Morrison and Catherine Hughes, my father's name. A different woman's name. Not my mother, who he supposedly married in 1946. There were more photographs, chronicling what looked like a complete life I'd never known existed. Daddy and Catherine and little James at Christmas. James's first birthday. James learning to walk. The last photographs were dated 1943, right before Daddy shipped out to the Pacific. One of them showed Catherine and James standing on a train platform, James about 2 years old, waving at the camera. On the back, "Goodbye for now. We'll wait for you forever. Love, C." But there was something else in the safe, something that made my blood run cold. A telegram, the kind they sent during the war, dated March 15, 1943. I unfolded it with shaking hands. Mrs. Catherine Morrison. "We regret to inform you that your husband, Corporal William Morrison, has been killed in action in the Pacific Theater. His personal effects will be sent to you. Our deepest condolences." Killed in action. But Daddy hadn't been killed in action. He'd come home in 1946, married my mother, lived until 1994. I stared at that telegram, trying to make sense of it. And then, at the bottom of the safe, I found a journal, a small leather-bound book, the pages yellow with age. The first entry was dated April 1943, just a few weeks after that telegram was sent. It was written in my father's handwriting. I couldn't read it there in that basement with strangers watching. I gathered everything from the safe, stuffed it all into a box that Bill found for me, thanked them all, and drove home in a daze. I don't even remember the drive. I just remember sitting in my living room with that box in front of me, scared to open it, but knowing I had to. Whatever was in that journal was going to change everything I thought I knew about my father. The journal was thin, only about 50 pages, but those pages contained secrets that had been buried for over 80 years. I made myself a cup of tea, sat in my comfortable chair by the window, and began to read. The handwriting was shaky at first, like Daddy had been writing under emotional duress, but it got steadier as it went on. The first entry explained everything. April 3rd, 1943. I don't know if anyone will ever read this, but I need to write it down. I need to confess what I've done. My name is William Morrison, and I'm supposed to be dead. As far as the Army is concerned, as far as my wife and son are concerned, I died 2 weeks ago on some godforsaken island in the Pacific. But I'm alive. I'm in a hospital in Hawaii, recovering from injuries that were supposed to kill me, but didn't. And I've made a choice that I know makes me a coward, but I can't go back. I can't face what's waiting for me back home. I had to stop reading for a moment. My father, a coward. The man who told me stories about his bravery in the war? I took a sip of tea and forced myself to continue. The truth is, I was a different person when I married Catherine. Young and stupid, and thinking I knew what I wanted. We got married too fast, had James too fast, and by the time I realized I'd made a mistake, it was too late. I loved Catherine. I did, but not the way a man should love his wife. And when I shipped out, part of me was relieved. Relieved to get away from the responsibility, from the feeling of being trapped. Does that make me a terrible person? Probably. When I got injured, when I was lying in that field hospital thinking I might die, something changed in me. I started thinking about the life I wanted versus the life I had. And then a buddy of mine, Tommy Chen, he died in the bed next to me. Died of his injuries. We looked similar enough, same height, same build, and the hospital was chaos, bodies everywhere, records getting mixed up. It would have been easy, I thought, to let them think Tommy was me and me was Tommy, to disappear, to start over. So that's what I did. I switched our dog tags while the nurses weren't looking. When Tommy died, they tagged him as William Morrison. They sent that telegram to Catherine saying I was dead, and I became Tommy Chen, at least on paper. Except Tommy didn't have any family, no one waiting for him back home. He was an orphan from San Francisco, perfect for a man who wanted to disappear. I had to stop reading again. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the journal. My father had faked his own death. He'd let his wife and child think he was dead while he started a new life. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Poor Catherine. Poor little James, who'd grown up without a father, thinking his daddy had died a hero's death. But I forced myself to keep reading because I needed to understand. I needed to know how the man who'd done this horrible thing had become the father I'd known and loved. I stayed in the hospital for another month, recovering. Nobody questioned that I was Tommy Chen. Why would they? It was chaos. Then they sent me to a rehabilitation facility in California. By the time I was discharged in December 1943, I really felt like a different person, Like William Morrison had actually died on that island and Tommy Chen had taken his place. Except I couldn't keep calling myself Tommy Chen forever. That felt wrong, using a dead man's name permanently. So when I got to South Carolina, I became William Morrison again. But a different William Morrison. A man with no past, no family, no wife or son waiting for him. I chose Myrtle Beach because it was small and far from California, and I'd never been there before. Started working construction, kept my head down, tried not to think about Catherine and James. But I thought about them every day, wondered how they were doing, if Catherine had remarried, if James would even remember me. The guilt was crushing, but I'd made my choice, and there was no going back. The next entries were sporadic, covering several years. Daddy wrote about settling in Myrtle Beach, buying the house on Ocean Boulevard in 1945, meeting my mother at a church social in 1946. Her name is Helen, he wrote. She's kind and sweet, and doesn't ask questions about my past. I told her I was in the war, which is true. I told her I lost my whole family, which is also true in a way, even if the losing was my choice. We're going to get married next month. Maybe with her, I can finally be the man I should have been. And then, a few entries later, Helen is pregnant. We're having a baby. I should be happy, and part of me is. But mostly I'm terrified. What if I fail this child the way I failed James? What if I'm not capable of being a good father? But Helen is so excited, so full of joy, that I can't let her see my fear. I'll be better this time. I have to be better this time. That baby was me. I was born in March 1943, which meant I was actually born before Daddy died, in the Pacific, which meant that for the first few months of my life, James was alive somewhere in California, probably being told stories about his brave father who died in the war. I tried to imagine it, tried to wrap my head around the timeline, and it made me feel sick. The journal entries became less frequent after I was born. Most of them were just brief notes about family life, about Howard being born in 1948, about Daddy's construction business doing well, about us kids growing up. He sounded happy in those entries, or at least content. But every so often, there would be an entry about Catherine and James. Saw a boy today who looked about the age James would be now. Wondered if my son looks like him. Wondered if he's happy. Wondered if Catherine ever told him the truth about what a coward his father was. The last entry in the journal was dated 1993, just a year before Daddy died. I'm 81 years old now, and my health is failing. The doctors say I might have another year, maybe 2 if I'm lucky. Dorothy takes good care of me, comes by every day, makes sure I'm eating and taking my medicine. She's a good daughter, better than I deserve. I've decided to write this all down, seal it in the safe, and leave it for her to find someday after I'm gone. She deserves to know the truth about who her father really was. Not the good man she thinks she knew, but the coward who abandoned his first family to start over. Maybe she'll hate me for it. Probably she should hate me for it. But at least she'll know the truth. I tried to find out what happened to Catherine and James over the years. It wasn't easy without risking exposure, but I managed to learn a few things. Catherine never remarried. She moved back in with her parents in Sacramento, raised James by herself, worked as a secretary to support them. She died in 1979. Heart attack. She was only 60 years old. James, I learned, became a teacher, got married, had kids of his own. I have grandchildren I've never met, will never meet. A whole other family that doesn't know I exist. The guilt has never left me. Not for one single day in 50 years. Every time I looked at Dorothy and Howard, every time I felt pride in the family I built here, there was always this shadow, this knowledge that I'd built it all on abandonment and lies. I was a better father to Dorothy and Howard than I was to James. I can say that honestly. I tried to be. I tried to make up for it, but it doesn't change what I did. If you're reading this, Dorothy, I'm sorry. Sorry for lying to you your whole life. Sorry for being a coward. Sorry for not being the man you thought I was. I hope you can forgive me someday, but I'll understand if you can't. All I can say is that loving you and your brother and your mother was the best thing I ever did, even if it started from the worst thing I ever did. That's where the journal ended. I sat there for a long time after I finished reading, the journal in my lap, tears running down my face. The man I'd known as my father, the man who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd walked me down the aisle at my wedding, who'd held my babies when they were born, That man had been living with this terrible secret his entire life. He'd abandoned a wife and child, faked his own death, and built a new life on that foundation of lies. But he'd also been a good father to me. That was the confusing part. He'd been kind and patient and loving. He'd worked hard to provide for us. He'd been there for every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every important moment of my life. How could both things be true? How could he be both the coward who abandoned James and the devoted father who raised me? I spent the next few days going through all the documents and photographs from the safe over and over again. I studied Catherine's face, trying to see what my father had seen in her. She was beautiful, with dark eyes and a warm smile. In the photographs where she was holding baby James, she looked so happy, so full of love. What must it have been like for her to receive that telegram saying her husband was dead? What must it have been like to raise James alone, working to support them, never knowing that her husband was alive and well on the other side of the country? And James, poor James, who'd grown up without a father, who'd been told his daddy was a war hero. According to Daddy's journal, James was still alive. He'd be in his 80s now, probably living somewhere in California. Did he ever wonder about his father? Did he visit a grave somewhere that didn't actually contain his father's body? Did he have any idea that he had a half-sister and half-brother he'd never met? I knew I had to find him. I had to tell him the truth. It wasn't fair that I knew, and he didn't. But I was also terrified. How do you call someone out of the blue and tell them that their father, who they thought died in World War II, actually faked his death and started a new family? How do you drop that kind of bomb on someone? I called Howard first. He lives in Charlotte now, retired from his job as an accountant, spends most of his time golfing and spoiling his grandchildren. "Howard," I said when he answered, "I need to tell you something about Daddy, something big. Can you come down this weekend?" I heard the concern in his voice when he said of course he would. When he arrived on Saturday morning, I sat him down and showed him everything. The photographs, the letters, the journal. I watched his face go through the same emotions I'd felt. Disbelief, shock, anger, confusion, grief. "This can't be real," he kept saying. "Daddy wouldn't do this. He wasn't this kind of person." But the evidence was right there in front of us. There was no denying it. We sat at my kitchen table for hours, going through it all, trying to make sense of it. "We have a brother," Howard finally said, his voice hollow. "A half-brother, James. He's out there somewhere, and he doesn't even know we exist." "I want to find him," I said. "I have to find him. He deserves to know the truth." Howard was quiet for a long moment. "Are you sure about that, Dot? Maybe some things are better left alone. This will hurt him. It'll destroy everything he believes about his father." "He has a right to know," I insisted. "If I were in his position, I'd want to know." "Wouldn't you?" Howard sighed and nodded. Yeah, I guess I would. So how do we find him?" That's when I remembered Sarah, my youngest granddaughter. She works in tech, knows all about computers and internet searches and databases. I called her that afternoon and asked if she could help me find someone. I didn't tell her why yet, just gave her the information I had. James Morrison, born September 1942 in Sacramento, California. Mother's name, Catherine Hughes Morrison. Sarah called me back 2 days later. "Grandma," she said, excitement in her voice. "I found him. James Morrison, 82 years old, living in a retirement community in Sacramento. Widower, 2 daughters, 4 grandchildren. He was a high school English teacher for 40 years before he retired. I found his address and phone number. Do you want me to email them to you?" My hands started shaking again. "Yes," I managed to say. "Yes, please send them." After I hung up, I just sat there staring at my phone. James was real. He wasn't just a name in Daddy's journal or a baby in faded photographs. He was a real person living a real life in California. A man who'd spent his whole life thinking his father had died a hero. And I was about to destroy that belief. It took me 3 days to work up the courage to call. I must have picked up the phone a dozen times and put it back down. What was I going to say? How do you start that conversation? Finally, on a Thursday morning, I dialed the number before I could talk myself out of it. The phone rang 3 times, 4 times. I was about to hang up when a man's voice answered. "Hello? Is this James Morrison?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Yes, this is James. Who's calling?" I took a deep breath. My name is Dorothy Morrison. I'm calling from South Carolina. I know this is going to sound crazy, but I think I'm your half-sister. I think your father didn't actually die in World War II. I think he faked his death and started a new family, and I'm part of that new family." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When James finally spoke, his voice was cold. "Ma'am, I don't know what kind of scam this is, but my father died in 1943. I have the telegram, I have the records, and I'm going to hang up now." "Wait," I said quickly. "Please, just wait. I have photographs. I have letters. I have your father's journal where he explains everything. I know this sounds impossible, but it's true. Your father's name was William Morrison. He was married to Catherine Hughes. You were born in September 1942. You lived in a small house with a white picket fence in Sacramento. Your mother died in 1979. Please, I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm just trying to tell you the truth." Another long silence. "How do you know all that?" His voice was different now, uncertain. "Because my father, our father, kept everything. He kept photographs of you and your mother. He kept the marriage certificate, the letters, everything. And he kept a journal where he confessed what he did. I just found it all last week in a safe in his old house. I've been trying to work up the courage to call you ever since." "This is insane," James said, but I could hear something in his voice now. Not belief exactly, but maybe the beginning of doubt. "My father died a hero. He's buried in a military cemetery in California. My mother grieved for him for the rest of her life. He's not buried there," I said gently. "Or if he is, it's not actually him in that grave. It's someone else, a soldier named Tommy Chen who died in the hospital. They switched dog tags. I know how crazy this sounds, James. I really do. But it's the truth. Your father survived the war. He moved to South Carolina, changed his name slightly, and started over. He married my mother in 1946. I was born in 1943. My brother Howard was born in 1948. Our father died in 1994 at the age of 82. I can prove all of this. I can send you copies of everything I found." I heard him breathing on the other end of the line, trying to process what I was telling him. "Why would he do that?" he finally asked, and his voice cracked. "Why would he abandon us? Abandon my mother? Let us think he was dead?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "His journal says he made a mistake marrying young, that he felt trapped, that he saw an opportunity to start over and took it. But he also says he regretted it every day for the rest of his life. That doesn't make it okay, I know that. Nothing makes what he did okay. But I thought you deserved to know the truth." "I need to see this evidence," James said after another long pause. "I need to see the photographs and the journal. Can you send them to me?" "I'll make copies and overnight them to you," I said. "But James, I want you to know, I'm not trying to take anything from you. I'm not after money or anything like that. I just thought you had a right to know." "If this is true," he said slowly, "if my father really did this, then I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. Angry? Betrayed? Relieved that he didn't actually die in pain on some battlefield? I don't know." "I understand," I said. "I've been feeling all those things too since I found out. It's confusing and painful, and I'm so sorry. I spent that whole afternoon at the copy shop, making copies of everything. The photographs, the letters, every page of the journal. I sent it all to James via overnight delivery, and then I waited. He called me 2 days later. I could tell from his voice that he'd been crying. "It's all true," he said without preamble. "I recognize my mother's handwriting in those letters. I recognize the house in the photographs. That's my father standing next to her. This is real. I'm so sorry," I said again. "I know this is a terrible shock. I always wondered why there was no body," James said, his voice distant. "Why the army said he was buried overseas and we couldn't bring him home. My mother accepted it, said lots of soldiers were buried where they fell. But I always wondered. And now I know. There was no body because he wasn't dead." We talked for over an hour that day. James told me about his life, about growing up without a father, about his mother's sadness that never quite went away. He told me about becoming a teacher, about his late wife Margaret, who died 3 years ago, about his daughters and grandchildren. And I told him about our father, about the man I'd known, about how he'd been a good father to Howard and me, even though he'd been a terrible father to James. "Did he ever mention me?" James asked at one point, and the hope in his voice broke my heart. Did he ever talk about me or my mother? Not to me directly, I admitted. But in his journal, he wrote about you all the time. He wondered what you looked like, if you were happy, if you'd become a good man. He was proud of you when he found out you'd become a teacher, even though he could never tell you that. He carried the guilt of what he did for 50 years. Good, James said bitterly. He should have felt guilty. Do you know what it's like growing up thinking your father died a hero? Having that on a pedestal your whole life? And now to find out he was alive the whole time, he just didn't want us anymore? His voice broke. What was wrong with us? What was wrong with me that he'd rather fake his death than be my father? Nothing was wrong with you, I said firmly. Nothing at all. This was about him, about his own weakness and cowardice. You didn't do anything wrong, James. You were just a little boy. We've talked on the phone every week since then. Last month, Howard and I flew out to Sacramento to meet James in person. It was strange and emotional and wonderful and heartbreaking all at the same time. Looking at James was like looking at photographs of our father as a young man. He had the same eyes, the same smile, the same gestures. We spent 3 days together, looking at photographs, sharing stories, trying to piece together the full picture of the man who'd been both of our fathers. James's daughters, my nieces that I'd never known existed, came to meet us too. They were shocked by the whole story, couldn't believe their grandfather hadn't actually died in the war like they'd always been told. But they were also curious and kind, wanting to know about their grandfather's second life, wanting to understand who he'd been. You know, my dears, I've been thinking a lot about forgiveness these past few months. Can you forgive someone for something they did decades ago? Something they regretted for the rest of their life but could never fix? I don't know. Some days I'm angry at my father for the lies, for the way he hurt Catherine and James. Some days I'm sad for all of us, for all the years we could have known each other if he'd just had the courage to tell the truth. And some days I'm grateful that he was a good father to me, even if he wasn't a good father to James. James says he's trying to forgive him. Not forget, he says, but forgive. He says holding on to the anger will only poison his remaining years, and he doesn't want that. I think that's very wise of him. Howard is still processing everything. He tends to internalize things, always has. But we're all trying to move forward together, to build some kind of relationship, even though it's 80 years too late. I've started putting together a family album, combining photographs from both sides of our father's life. Pictures of James as a baby next to pictures of me as a baby. Pictures of our father with Catherine alongside pictures of him with my mother. It's strange seeing them all together like that. This divided life finally united on paper. James says it helps him, seeing that our father did build a good life, that he wasn't just running away to nothing. He was running away to something, even if it was built on a terrible lie. We're planning a trip next spring, all of us together. James wants to visit Myrtle Beach, wants to see the house where our father lived, walk on the same beaches he walked on. Howard's going to fly in from Charlotte. James's daughters will come too. We're going to scatter some of Catherine's ashes in the ocean here, since she never got to travel much when she was alive. It feels like the right thing to do, bringing her here in some way, closing that circle. I've been going through my own memories of Daddy, re-examining them all through this new lens. That time he got teary-eyed watching me walk down the aisle at my wedding. Was he thinking about James, wondering if his first son had gotten married, wishing he could have been there? Those Sunday dinners we had together after Mama died, when he'd get quiet and distant sometimes. Was he thinking about Catherine, about the wife he'd abandoned? All those stories he told about the war, were they real or lies? I'll never know for sure. He took those answers with him when he died. But here's what I do know. People are complicated. They can be good and bad at the same time. They can make terrible choices and spend the rest of their lives trying to make up for them. My father was a coward who abandoned his family, but he was also a devoted father who loved Howard and me fiercely. Both things are true, and somehow I have to find a way to hold both truths in my heart at the same time. The hardest part, I think, has been reconciling the father I knew with the man in those journal entries. The daddy who taught me to ride a bike, who stayed up all night with me when I had pneumonia, who cried when I graduated high school. That man seemed so solid, so real, so incapable of the kind of cruelty it takes to abandon a child. But he did it. He absolutely did it. And then he spent 50 years trying to be a better man without ever fixing the original sin. I've talked to my own children about it, my 3 kids who are in their 50s now, with kids of their own. They're struggling with it too. Their grandfather, who they loved, who played with them and spoiled them and told them stories, was living a lie the whole time. My daughter Patricia said something interesting the other day. She said maybe Daddy was trying to be 2 different people, trying to be the man he should have been from the start, even though he couldn't undo what he'd already done. Maybe that's why he was such a devoted grandfather, so present and loving with her and her brothers. Maybe he was trying to make up for the grandchildren he'd abandoned along with James. I found something else in that safe that I haven't told anyone about yet, not even James or Howard. At the very bottom, underneath everything else, was a small metal box. Inside was a wedding ring, a simple gold band, smaller than the one Daddy wore when he was married to Mama. I turned it over and saw an inscription inside. W.M. and C.H. Forever, June 1941. His first wedding ring, the one he would have been wearing when he supposedly died. He must have taken it off before he switched dog tags with Tommy Chen, kept it all these years, hidden it away with all the other evidence of his first life. I showed it to James when we met in Sacramento. He held it in his palm for a long time, not saying anything, just staring at this physical piece of his father's betrayal. Finally he said, "My mother kept his things. The army sent her a box with his personal effects after he died. His watch, his wallet, some letters. But there was no wedding ring. She always wondered about that, thought maybe it had been lost in battle. Now I know, he kept it. He kept this reminder of her even though he'd left her behind. We decided together what to do with it. James wanted to bury it with his mother. She's buried in Sacramento, and even though she's been gone since 1979, James said it felt right to give her back her husband's ring, even symbolically. So that's what we did. The 3 of us, Howard and James and me, we went to Catherine's grave on that trip to Sacramento. It's a small cemetery with old oak trees, very peaceful. Her headstone is simple. Catherine Hughes Morrison, 1919 to 1979, beloved mother. James knelt down and dug a small hole next to the headstone while Howard and I stood there watching. He placed the ring in the hole, then covered it back up with dirt. "There, Mama," he said quietly. "Now you have your ring back. I'm sorry it took so long." We all stood there for a few minutes in silence. I thought about this woman I'd never met, this woman who'd loved my father first, who'd been betrayed so completely. What would she think if she could see us now, her son and the children of the man who'd abandoned her, standing together at her grave? Would she be angry? Sad? Would she understand that we were all victims of Daddy's lies in different ways? Back in Myrtle Beach, I've been doing something that probably sounds strange. I've been talking to Daddy, out loud, in the house on Ocean Boulevard, before the developers tear it down. The new owners gave me permission to visit one last time before demolition starts next month. I've been going there and sitting in what used to be his study, and I've been telling him what I think about what he did. I tell him I understand he was young and scared and felt trapped. I tell him I understand that people make mistakes. But I also tell him that what he did was unforgivable, that abandoning James and Catherine was cruel beyond measure, that the guilt he felt was deserved and earned. I tell him I love him because he was a good father to me, but that I'm also ashamed of him for being a terrible father to James. And I tell him I wish he'd trusted me enough to tell me the truth before he died, instead of leaving me to discover it this way. Sometimes I cry when I'm talking to him. Sometimes I get angry and raise my voice. Sometimes I just sit there in silence, trying to feel some connection to him, trying to understand. The house feels different now, knowing what I know. The walls that held so many happy memories for me were also holding this enormous secret. The basement where we used to play as kids was hiding that safe full of evidence. The whole foundation of my childhood was literally built on a lie. Howard came with me last week for what will probably be our final visit to the house. We walked through every room together, remembering. The kitchen where Mama made Sunday dinners, the living room where we opened Christmas presents, the upstairs bedrooms where we grew up. My old room still has marks on the doorframe where Daddy measured our heights every year. Howard's room still has the shelf Daddy built for his baseball trophies. Evidence of a loving father everywhere we looked. "Do you think he loved Mama?" Howard asked me as we stood in their old bedroom. Really loved her? Or was she just his second chance? I thought about that for a long time. I think he did love her, I finally said. But maybe in a different way than he loved Catherine. Catherine was his first love, the one he ran away from. Mama was his redemption, his chance to do things right. That doesn't make it less real, just different. We found more things during that last visit, things we'd missed before. In the attic, there was a box of old Christmas cards. Most were from people I remembered, friends and family. But tucked in the back were cards from the 1940s and early 1950s addressed to William and Catherine Morrison, from Catherine's parents, from friends they'd had in California. Daddy had kept them. He'd kept these reminders of his first life, hidden them away where no one would find them, but he'd kept them. There was also a baby book for James, the kind new mothers keep with spaces for first words and first steps and first everything. Catherine had filled it out carefully in her neat handwriting. First smile, 6 weeks old, November 1942. First tooth, 7 months, April 1943. The entries stopped in March 1943, right when she would have received that telegram saying her husband was dead. I imagine her putting that baby book away, too heartbroken to continue recording the milestones she'd have to reach alone. I sent the baby book to James. He called me when he received it, crying. I didn't know this existed, he said. I didn't know my mother had kept track of all these things. This is the only record of my early childhood. Everything else was lost over the years. He was grateful to have it, this tangible piece of his mother's love and his father's betrayal, all mixed together in one small book. You know, I've learned something through all of this. Secrets don't really stay buried. They might stay hidden for years, decades even, but eventually they find a way to surface. That safe could have stayed hidden forever. If the developers hadn't decided to gut the basement, if they hadn't moved those shelving units, nobody would have ever known. Daddy's secret would have died with him. But it didn't. The truth came out anyway, 30 years after his death, and now all of us have to deal with it. I wonder sometimes what Daddy would think if he could see us now. His two families, separate for 80 years, finally connected. James and Howard talk on the phone regularly now. They're becoming friends, which is beautiful and sad at the same time. They should have grown up together. They should have known each other their whole lives. Instead, they're getting to know each other in their 80s, making up for lost time that can never really be made up for. James's daughters and my kids have connected too. They're planning a big family reunion this summer, all of us together for the first time. Daddy's grandchildren and great-grandchildren from both sides of his life, meeting each other, forming relationships, creating something good out of something terrible. I like to think Daddy would be happy about that, seeing his divided family finally united, even if it took his death and the revelation of his worst secret to make it happen. I've started writing letters to Catherine, even though she's been gone for over 40 years. I don't send them anywhere, obviously. I just write them and keep them in a folder. I tell her I'm sorry for what my father did to her. I tell her that James turned out to be a wonderful man despite growing up without his father. I tell her about my mother, about the life Daddy built in South Carolina, about how he was a better man in his second life but never quite escaped the guilt of his first. I don't know why I do this. Maybe it helps me process everything. Maybe I feel like she deserves to know what happened after she died, that she deserves to be part of the story somehow. The house on Ocean Boulevard is scheduled for demolition next week. They're going to tear it down and build a 4-unit condo complex in its place. Progress, they call it. I've made my peace with it. That house held too many secrets anyway. Maybe it's better that it comes down, that someone can build something new on that land without the weight of the past pressing down on them. But I took something from the house before they tear it down. In Daddy's old study, there was a window that looked out over the backyard. He used to stand at that window in the evenings, just looking out, thinking about who knows what. Now I know he was probably thinking about California, about the family he'd left behind, carrying his guilt and his secrets. I asked the contractors if I could have that window before they demolished the house. They thought I was crazy, but they cut it out for me carefully and helped me load it into my truck. I'm going to give it to James. I think he should have something physical from the house where our father lived his second life. When I told him about it on the phone, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Thank you. That means more than you know. It's like getting a piece of him back, even though I'm angry at him." Does that make sense? It made perfect sense. That's exactly how I feel too. angry and sad and grateful and hurt, all at the same time. My granddaughter Sarah, the one who helped me find James, asked me the other day if I regret opening that safe. Would you rather not have known? She asked. Would it have been easier to keep believing Daddy was who you thought he was? I thought about that question for a long time before I answered. Yes, it would have been easier. Ignorance usually is easier than truth, but easier isn't always better. No, I told her. I don't regret it. James deserved to know the truth about his father. And I deserve to know the truth too, even though it hurts, even though it's complicated. The truth is always better than a lie, even a comfortable lie. And besides, I have a brother now that I never knew existed. I have nieces and more family. That's a gift, even if it came wrapped in pain. I've been thinking about legacies lately, about what we leave behind when we die. Daddy thought he was leaving behind the memory of a good man, a devoted father and husband, a respected member of the community. And he was those things, to Howard and me at least. But he also left behind this other legacy, this secret life and abandoned family. Both are part of who he was. Both are true. And now both families know about each other, for better or worse. Next month is what would have been Daddy's 112th birthday. James suggested we do something to mark the occasion, all of us together. So we're planning a small gathering here in Myrtle Beach. James is flying in from California. Howard is driving down from Charlotte. Our kids and grandkids are coming. We're going to go to the beach, the one Daddy used to take us to when we were children, and we're going to talk about him, the good and the bad, the loving father and the cowardly abandoner, the man who tried to be better and the man who failed in the trying. And then we're going to scatter some of Catherine's ashes in the Atlantic Ocean, mixing them with the Carolina coast that Daddy loved so much, bringing her here finally, letting her be part of this place where he built his second life. It feels right somehow, this symbolic reuniting of the family that he split apart. James says his mother would have liked the ocean. She grew up near the Pacific and used to take him to the beach when he was small. Now she'll rest in both oceans, connected across the country, just like her son is connected to the family he never knew he had. I don't know what happens after we die, if Daddy is somewhere watching all this unfold. If he is, I hope he sees that we're trying to make something good out of what he did. We're building bridges across the chasm he created. We're forming relationships that should have existed all along. We're taking his worst failure and turning it into something like redemption, even if it's a redemption he doesn't deserve and didn't earn. The truth is, I still love my father. Despite everything I know now, despite the lies and the abandonment and the cowardice, I still love him. He was my daddy. He kissed my scraped knees and helped me with my homework and walked me down the aisle. Those memories are real, even if they were built on a false foundation. But I love him with eyes wide open now. I love him knowing exactly who he was, the good and the terrible, and I've made peace with the fact that he was both. James says he's getting there too, to a place where he can hold his anger and his curiosity and his desire to understand all at the same time. He says he dreams about his father sometimes now, dreams where they meet and talk and Daddy explains himself. James wakes up from those dreams feeling sad, but also strangely comforted. It's the conversation we never got to have in life, he told me. So my brain is creating it for me in dreams. I don't know if it helps or makes it worse. Howard, typically practical, has taken a different approach. He's organized all the documents and photographs chronologically, creating a complete timeline of Daddy's two lives. He says it helps him to see it all laid out logically, to understand the sequence of events. This is when he married Catherine. This is when you were born. This is when he faked his death. This is when he married Mama. This is when I was born. Seeing it all in order helps Howard make sense of the senseless. As for me, I keep going back to that journal, reading and rereading Daddy's words, trying to understand the man who wrote them. There's an entry from 1985, around the time my first grandchild was born. Held Dorothy's baby today, he wrote. Little Sarah, named after her great-grandmother. She has my eyes. I wonder if James's children have my eyes, too. I wonder if I have great-grandchildren I'll never meet. The weight of what I've done gets heavier with each generation, each new life that stems from my choices. But I can't go back. I can only be the best grandfather I can be to the grandchildren I'm allowed to know. That breaks my heart every time I read it. The tragedy isn't just what he did to Catherine and James. It's what he did to himself, condemning himself to a lifetime of guilt and secrecy. He could have been free if he'd just had the courage to face what he'd done. But he didn't, and so he lived in a self-imposed prison for 50 years, watching his divided family grow and expand, unable to bring them together. But we're bringing them together now. That's what I keep telling myself. We're doing what he couldn't do. We're creating the unified family he should have had all along. It's 80 years too late, and he's not here to see it, but it's happening anyway. And maybe that's its own kind of justice. Not the punishment kind of justice, but the making things right kind. I've been asked several times if I'm going to write a book about all this. My friend Martha from book club says it would make an incredible story. And maybe it would. But I don't know if I want to share it with the world beyond our family. Some stories are too personal, too painful. This is our story, Daddy's and Catherine's and James's and mine. It belongs to us, though I'm sharing it with all of you today, because I think there's something important here, something about truth and secrets and forgiveness that maybe other people need to hear. The demolition of the house starts in 3 days. I'm going one last time tomorrow, just me, to say goodbye properly. I'm going to walk through every room one final time, remembering the good parts of growing up there while acknowledging the secrets that were buried in the basement. I'm going to thank the house, strange as that sounds, for keeping those secrets until the right time for them to be revealed. Because if that safe had been discovered when Daddy was still alive, when Mama was still alive, it would have destroyed so many people. At least this way, the only people hurt are those of us who are old enough and strong enough to handle the truth. And tomorrow night, after I've said goodbye to the house, I'm having dinner with James and Howard. Just the 3 of us, Daddy's children from 2 different lives, sitting down together as siblings for one of the first times. We're going to look at more photographs, share more stories, continue the process of weaving our separate histories into one shared family narrative. It won't erase what Daddy did. It won't make the abandonment okay. But it'll make something new out of the broken pieces. That's all any of us can do, really. When we discover that our past isn't what we thought it was, when the people we loved turn out to be different than we believed, we have a choice. We can let it destroy us, or we can use it to build something new. We can stay angry and hurt, or we can try to understand and forgive, even when forgiveness seems impossible. We can keep the families divided, or we can bridge the gap. I'm choosing to bridge the gap. James is choosing to bridge the gap. Howard is choosing to bridge the gap. It's hard work, and sometimes it feels like we're not making any progress, but we're trying. That has to count for something. There's one more thing I found in that safe that I haven't mentioned yet. It was a letter addressed to me, separate from the journal. Daddy must have written it shortly before he died. The envelope just said Dorothy in his shaky handwriting. I've only read it once because it's too painful to read more than that. But I want to share part of it with you, because I think it explains things better than I can. My dearest Dorothy, it says, if you're reading this, you found the safe and you know everything. I'm sorry. Those words are inadequate, I know, but they're all I have. I'm sorry for lying to you your whole life. I'm sorry for being a coward. I'm sorry for doing something so terrible that I had to hide it for 50 years. But I'm not sorry for the life I built with you and Howard and your mother. Loving you was the best thing I ever did, even if it started from the worst thing I ever did. I know you probably hate me now. I understand if you do. But I want you to know that being your father was the greatest privilege of my life. Every moment with you was a gift I didn't deserve but treasured anyway. When I walked you down the aisle at your wedding, I thought my heart would burst with pride and love and guilt all mixed together. Proud of the woman you'd become, loving you more than life itself, guilty that James never got to have that moment with his own father. I've thought about telling you the truth 1,000 times over the years, but I was afraid you'd hate me, afraid I'd lose you, afraid the truth would hurt you more than the lie. Maybe I was wrong about that. Maybe I should have trusted you with the truth, but I didn't. And now all I can do is leave this explanation and hope you can understand, even if you can't forgive. Find James if you can. Tell him I'm sorry. Tell him that not a day went by that I didn't think about him. Tell him I was proud of him, even though I had no right to be. Tell him his mother was a saint who deserved so much better than me. And tell him that he has a sister and a brother who would have loved to know him. Maybe it's not too late for you all to know each other. That's my last hope, my last wish, that something good can come from the mess I made. I love you, Dorothy. I've always loved you. That was never a lie. Your loving father, William Morrison. That's how the letter ended. And you know what? I believe him. I believe he did love me, that it wasn't a lie. But I also believe he loved James and Catherine, and he abandoned them anyway. Both things are true. He was capable of great love and great cruelty. He was capable of being a wonderful father and a terrible father to two different sons. That's the complexity of human nature, I suppose. We're not just one thing. We're contradictions and complications wrapped up in skin. So to answer the question that I know some of you are probably wondering, do I forgive him? I don't know yet. Some days I think I do. Some days I'm not sure forgiveness is even the right word for what I feel. Acceptance, maybe. Understanding, perhaps. A complicated mixture of love and disappointment and sadness and gratitude. He gave me life and a good childhood. He also built that life on abandonment and lies. How do you balance those things? How do you forgive someone for something that hurt people you love but didn't directly hurt you? I think it's going to take time. Maybe more time than I have left at 81 years old. Maybe it's something I'll still be working on when I die. And that's okay. Some things don't have neat resolutions. Some wounds don't fully heal. Some questions don't have clear answers. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Life is messy and complicated, and the people we love can disappoint us in ways we never imagined, and we still have to figure out how to keep living and loving anyway. James said something wise when we last talked. He said, "Our Father made a choice that affected generations, but we get to make choices too. We can choose to be bitter, or we can choose to build something new. We can choose to stay strangers, or we can choose to be family. Our Father took that choice away from us for 80 years, but now we have it back. So what are we going to choose? We're choosing family. Messy, complicated, built on lies, but trying to be honest, now family. It's not the family any of us expected or wanted, but it's the family we have, and we're going to make the most of it." The sun is setting now over Conway. I'm sitting on my back porch, the same porch where I got that call about the safe 3 months ago, and I'm watching the sky turn orange and pink. Tomorrow, the house on Ocean Boulevard comes down. Tomorrow, I say goodbye to the physical structure that held my childhood memories and my father's secrets. But the house was never really the important part. The important part is the people, the relationships, the truth that finally came to light. Daddy's been gone for 30 years, but in some ways, I feel like I'm just now really saying goodbye to him. Goodbye to the man I thought he was. Goodbye to the simple story I believed about my family. Goodbye to the comfortable lies. And hello to the complicated truth, to my brother James, who I should have known my whole life. To a family history that's messier and more painful than I ever imagined, but also more complete. So that's my story, my dears. The story of opening a safe and discovering that my father had an entire life I never knew about. A first wife, a first son, a first chance at being a father that he abandoned to start over with my mother and me. It's a hard story. It doesn't have a happy ending exactly, but it has truth, and truth matters more than comfort. I want to ask you something. My beautiful souls watching this, have you ever discovered a secret about someone you loved that changed everything you thought you knew about them? Have you ever had to reconcile two different versions of the same person? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and your stories help me feel less alone in all this. And if this story touched your heart in any way, if it made you think or feel or remember something important, please hit that like button. Subscribe to Grandma's Touching Stories so you never miss another real story from real grandmothers. Share this with someone who might need to hear it. Sometimes we all need to know that secrets eventually surface, that truth will find a way, and that we're stronger than we think when it comes to handling difficult revelations. Thank you for listening to this old woman's story. Thank you for sitting with me through all this pain and confusion and eventual acceptance. Thank you for not judging my father too harshly or judging him harshly enough, whichever feels right to you. Thank you for understanding that life is complicated and people are flawed, and family is whatever we make of it. A big hug from this grandmother who learned that the past is never really past, that secrets have a way of coming to light when they're ready, and that it's never too late to build bridges, even if those bridges should have been built 80 years ago. Until next time, my beautiful souls, keep loving your families, keep seeking truth even when it's painful, and keep building connections even when they're complicated, because in the end, it's the connections that matter. It's the family we choose to create from the pieces we're given. It's the courage to face difficult truths and keep living anyway. God bless you all wherever you are. And remember, you're stronger than you think. Whatever secrets you're carrying or discovering, you can survive them, I promise. Until we meet again.